I have with me writer, director, coach, Daniel Alegi. Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Okay, let's go with Danny. It's faster.
Okay, Danny.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. And I am talking to Danny, and I'm in Pennsylvania, and you are in Sweden?
I'm in the middle of a beautiful Swedish forest, about an hour from Oslo, Norway, and about 2 hours from London.
Wow. That's crazy. But you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I happen to know a lot of people who have been living in Sweden lately. So
Yeah.
it's been this very strange migration of people that I know going to Sweden. So it must be beautiful.
Well, I migrated from LA to Sweden in 2003,
Oh,
and
you've been there
my
wow.
idea was to come here for a year for a film project, shooting a film in Finland, and this has been my base ever since.
That's awesome. So I guess you loved it enough to stay.
Well, I do have, I guess at this point, so three countries that I call home, and I work in all three, and I move a bit, but I haven't lived permanently in the U.S. I guess from 2004.
Wow. That's awesome. And okay, so I saw in your bio that you graduated from Brown
Yep.
University. Okay. And did you study screenwriting or filmmaking there?
No, actually, I didn't. I studied international relations, and
Hmm.
interestingly enough, my focus was in computer science, which I'm still quite involved in, since film married computers a few years back, and really I was interested in the idea of revolutions. I study revolutions
Hmm. Interesting.
and ways in which writers could actually influence revolutions.
Wow, that's awesome. So, when did you decide that screenwriting and filmmaking was going to be your full time gig?
Well, it took me a while. I think I was about 26 or 27, and I graduated, and I was actually working in Italy, and I was working for IBM as a salesman. I was selling computers, and that was something that I knew, and I had some language skills, and I did a lot of that, and I was very lucky because it was a good time for selling computers. People didn't have them, banks didn't have them. It was sort of the PC revolution. And suddenly I realized 5 years later that I had an idea for a film and I had the money to produce it myself.
Nice. And then, so you wrote it and then produced it and filmed it?
Yeah, yeah, right. So actually what happened is I went to a kind of night film school in Rome, working with documentarists from the former Soviet Union. And I just sort of showed up in this basement, and it was full of smoke, and people were talking about film in a way that just resonated for me in ways that nothing else had ever with me before. It suddenly hit me that this was what I was looking for as a kind of bubble to contain everything else I was about and everything else I'd done and the places and countries I'd lived in. And suddenly film and stories, told cinematically became my goal. And that's where I decided this is what I'm going to do. And I think about a year and a half later, I shot this first short film that actually got me into film school in the States. And then I also worked on some films, Italian films, and they were very lucky projects. I only worked on a few very strong independent films that went to the Cannes Festival, did very well, and I just had sort of a kind of a lucky comeback. So I didn't start shooting at 17. I didn't always have a digital camera in my hand, uh, um, but I had always been a passionate photographer. So I was on the lookout for images from the very beginning, And I'd been a child TV actor, actually, now that I recall. uh, my mother had actually sent me to be a 8-year-old TV actor in 1973 in Italy, where we lived at the time. And the funny thing is, my brother and I were actors in the show where we were kids and we were speaking English. So it was like a kind of an experience working with lights and working with crews and going to Cinecittà studios every day. And the funny thing is, next door to the studio where we were working on these TV shows, there was a movie going on. There was a shoot. There was an entire city made of cardboard. There was an ocean made of plastic and this gigantic Titanic-like ship, I think made of wood. And I would sit on a pile of sand and look at these folks shoot this thing, and I had no idea what it was. I never had any idea what that was. I never asked. Until about 20 years later, I went back to the studios to edit a film of mine, and I saw a poster, and I said, I know that shit. I know that town. I was there. And this was the poster for Fellini's Amarcord, Oscar-winning film, about memory, about remembering your own life.
Wow.
And so there's some funny things with film happening in my life that were not my primary occupation until, as I said, I came back to the States for graduate film school. And I ended up going to what I think is the best film program in the U.S., excluding the top sort of, well-known drama schools, NYU, UCLA, USC. These are clearly the big schools. But of the smaller schools, the ones that are out in Austin, Texas, or, Temple and in Philly, of the smaller schools, I think I was lucky enough to go to a program which I still consider to be the real life-changing period of my life, and that's the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, UWM Film School. This is a quite extraordinary program based in, independent experimental film, a place that is entirely out of a student's way, but if you need them to get you an Avid, they'll get you an Avid. But they're not going to remind you of what you don't know every day. And we had a great group of kids. It was 8 grad students. All of us made award-winning films, including Chris Smith, who won Sundance with a cult film called American Movie, which was a documentary about one of us students who had 4 kids, worked at a cemetery, and made horror films at night. And then he became very famous. He went to David Letterman many times. His name is Mark Borchardt. And so I spent 2.5 years in the company of a tremendous group of young people, I guess me included. And that was my sort of, last step before showing up in Los Angeles.
I love the short. I'm assuming that you focus on short film, correct?
Well, I've always tried to make films that I could pay for myself. I mean, I always found that people I work with struggle a lot with the money side of films. And I always wondered, what are ways to reduce the impact of film, of money in the filmmaking. And I've always loved, for example, John Cassavetes, independent writer, director, actor from New York, who's a cult reference for many independent filmmakers, including myself. And he had this strategy, which was always make very, very cheap films so that at least you're not losing money or not getting into debt. So he would make very, very cheap films. And sometimes he would do silly things like, go to parties and pitch films he hadn't written yet, then go back to the hotel with his secretary and write the feature script in 2 days and show up on the Monday saying, here it is. So he would, in a way, kind of disrespect the industry, we can say, in terms of the seriousness of the material. But I've liked short films always because you don't have to spend a lot of time hustling for money. Mm. And to a certain extent, I consider the short film kind of an art form, kind of a genre in itself, as opposed to a kind of business card for Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Which is what most people do, is they make a short, they try to get some awards, and then they go to Los Angeles and they're ready for features. Mm-hmm. But features are not just longer, they also belong to somebody else. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so I've always really encouraged what I consider to be personal film projects, things that are rooted in your own experience and don't necessarily have to be 7 or 8 year long projects to make. Mm, right. And I guess one of the reasons was that I've always, I started making babies with my wife before I started making films. Mm-hmm. And I always had this question, will I be able to be a full-time filmmaker or a part-time filmmaker? And sometimes you choose between, buying diapers or developing film. And back in the day, making a film on 16 or 35 millimeter film was expensive.
Right.
So you have to spend, $120 to shoot a roll, another $120 to develop it, then make an answer print. And, for 11 minutes of film that you've never seen until you get it home 3 weeks later, you've already spent close to $700.
Right.
So, it was just a matter of survival for me to be able to try to focus on the longest possible short films I could make. So usually the work I do in this category of the personal film is usually around half an hour long. Mm-hmm. Because that's a format that doesn't really require too much external help.
Right.
And also there's something that comes from that, is the fact that I made the short film in 1999. I think it took me about 2 years to make it. And the film was called Czar of Make-Believe. And Czar Make-Believe was the story of a Russian immigrant in the U.S. looking for a part to play in anybody's movie. Like, he was just looking for acting work. And at a certain point, the director drops out of the movie and leaves this character in the middle of this movie free to basically create a story for himself, to get himself out of this movie, out of his nightmare of being in a film with no way out. And this film actually did quite well in festivals around the world. Mm-hmm. And what happened, which was really something I had completely not anticipated, is that the Q&A sessions after the film just kept going and going, and people wanted to know everything about this film. And people wanted to know how it was made and why I did this, and what does this mean, and it just went on and on. And at one festival, the director of the festival said, I got to get Danny off stage because I got another film coming after this. But if you want to follow him to this other room, I've set up a room and you can continue to talk to him. And lo and behold, almost everybody from the audience left the movie theater and came into this room to continue talking about my short film.
That's awesome.
And that session lasted over 2 hours, and I still recognize that as my first workshop.
Awesome. Which is going to be my next question was, so all this led into your coaching, and you're, and I wanted to ask you, because your website is amazing for anybody who wants to go on there and check it out. And you do online workshops, right?
Yeah. I do seminars, which are like a one-day affair in which I just present my method, my way of working. And then I do workshops in which we spend actually a few days together, 3 to 5 days, actually writing scenes, short films, and shooting a short film as a group. Mm-hmm. And then I do online different formats, courses or just sessions with multiple people on a Skype window, and people talk about their work. This is a format that I've done here in Sweden with the Swedish Film Institute, for example, with 4 or 5 young writers, and we just work on a shared screen, and people kind of brainstorm and get feedback live. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I sort of gravitated toward the workshop because I think I've always been inspired by phenomenal teachers that I've had. Mm-hmm. You know, not only at Brown, but also before. Also, I still remember some, life-changing teachers that I had in elementary school and high school. And I've just always been inspired by people that dedicate themselves to a passion, so much so that they will share it no matter what. Mm-hmm. Because that's what they're on, the earth to do, to say it in a kind of Zen way.
Right.
And I think to a certain extent, even though I love telling stories and I love the show part more than tell part, I have noticed on some productions where people that work with me, they would actually stop working and take notes. Because I have a tendency to describe a shot and say what I want from it while we're making it. Mm-hmm. So instead of just saying to the camera, let's pan left or right here and let them do it, I would say, let's pan left or right here because so we can catch this and see this and reveal that and work on this drama and that relationship. And people just, so my films were becoming kind of, sort of lessons, I guess. And so when I arrived in Los Angeles, and I worked on a couple of films, but within 9 months, I was already teaching at a college in LA.
Right.
I was already teaching 2 days a week cinematography, and I was teaching 16mm filmmaking at the College of the Canyons in Valencia, which is a fantastically sophisticated community college for this sprawling community, which is Valencia, about 40 miles north of LA. And so basically, I would always, from then on, I've always had a couple of days a week where I actually teach formal instruction, and wonderful things happen that way, where I would find mothers at my door bringing cases of wine, telling me that I changed the lives of their kids. And some of these guys are now out there doing phenomenal stuff at festivals. Mike Ott, who's a great young director, was just at Austin with his California Dreaming, which is a phenomenal film. And sometimes you might want to be sort of less than humble and say, I think I had something to do with that. Yeah. And I'm not looking for that recognition, really. I'm just, in a way, inspired by the fact that others are really grooving on this cinematic language that we have. This now very easy, very cheap, very available thing that we have in our hands, which is to make images, tell stories, and change other people's lives. Right. It's a very privileged thing. And clearly writing is the skeleton of this.
Right.
So if the walking body is the film, the skeleton that connects all the bones and the parts and allows it to work, of course, is the writing part. Mm-hmm. So that's a focus for me now. Since I moved to Sweden, I have taught at a Swedish university for, I think, 10 years. Theory and practice of film at the University of Karlstad, which is, recognized now as one of the top programs where students not only study film, but also practice it. There's many professors of cinema that have never shot a foot of film in their life.
Right.
So basically, I really have been developing this idea of practice. If you go to my website, you'll see that it says on the front page, practice your storytelling.
Yes. Yep.
Because that's a little bit like anybody who does yoga will tell you. You can't do yoga one day and say, okay, I'm done with it. I'm cool. I get it.
Right. And I saw that you also have an app. Or do you still have that app?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, as I said, I have this sort of computer background that won't let me go. And so what happened is, the app is called Screenwriting, which is kind of a play on words between script writing and Superman's weakness. Kryptonite can kill Superman, right. And scripts can kill people too. I think. In other words, you have to be able to master the negativity and turn it into the energy of your stories.
Right.
And so 2 years ago, I left the university here in Sweden to dedicate myself completely to the making of some very specific resources for writers. And one of these resources is Screenwriting, which is basically an iOS app. I mean, it's for the iPad or other tablets, and it's a visual system of story development. It's a sort of a cousin to the mind map, but it's also very different in many ways. And actually, the very first version of the app is only a week old. So I've been testing this app for the last week because it's literally just passed its very first hurdle, which is to become a physical application. And now we're working on the second version, the beta version, which I'm hoping will be ready to test with writers out in the wild in September.
Does it take them through the process of developing a story or a screenplay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Screenwriting basically is the product of a kind of intuition that I got, I think in 2009, where I went to Africa to teach film workshops. And I found myself in villages in South Africa where the kids had never made a movie.
Right.
But they knew everything about storytelling, and they knew everything about the rhythm of life, and they knew everything about cinematic movement. In other words, they would dance and sing while I told them stuff. And we made a bunch of films. I went with a wonderful Norwegian organization that always sponsors my workshops, called NUF. And it was just one of those moments where I realized that not all storytellers know how to write. It just hit me that writing is your ability to communicate the story to someone, but actually having the story in you is, a secret that many people just carry with them all their lives. Just being full of stories, but never having the time or the skill or the luck to tell it, or to find an audience, or to find the way to package it in understandable formats. Mm-hmm. Some people tell stories by example, just by who they are and how they walk, or how they talk. But when I started to develop Screenwriting as an application, I started to think, how can I help the writer who knows how to write, but also the writer who doesn't know how to write? Mm-hmm. And a lot of writers who don't know how to write, for example, in my experience, are producers, creative producers, or editors, or cameramen. They're really good at telling the story from the point of view of their particular field, mm-hmm. But they're not really that good at getting up at 6 in the morning and writing 20 minutes every morning.
Right.
So Scriptonite is a story development app which is very visual, so that it does produce text, but you can develop structure, and you can develop scenes, and you can develop conflicts and relationships, even though you might not be able to describe them.
I think it sounds really exciting. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, what a great idea. I mean, for writers, there are not that many apps for writing. I mean, how awesome to be able to pull up and get an app. I mean, they have a lot of screenwriting formats that you can buy to do it that way. But I just thought it was amazing. Like, you could pull up your app on an iPad when you're like on an airplane somewhere, and you can write down stories that you're thinking about, and you know, and develop them into something.
Yeah. Because what happened? I mean, I think exactly the same. I mean, this is why I left a fixed position, a career position as a university professor, basically, and said, I think Scriptonite is bigger than that. In other words, Scriptonite is not something that I'm going to grade you on. This is something that you can take and you can fly on your own. Maybe you can finish all the scripts you've never had time for.
Right.
Because I tested some, at the beginning I would test this on paper, and people would finish feature scripts in a month. I mean, any writer knows that, that the time frame for writing film is much longer than that. Mm-hmm. And that most writers, down the road of their script, give up. It's not that anybody isn't talented.
Yeah. Well, they kind of write themselves in a corner, and then they can't figure it out,
Yeah, I mean, it's for whatever reason, and it's nobody's fault. But screenwriting, it requires a kind of full immersion into a world which is fundamentally not the world you're living in.
Right.
If you have kids, and if you have a job, and if you have things to do, and if you're drawn in by the realities of life, which you probably are going to be drawn in by those realities, you wish you had a tool that allowed you to very quickly get through some of the stuff in your film, structure and character developments, so that you could write, for example, out of order. Right. You could write the end before the beginning, or write the middle, or not have to follow a kind of page-by-page, page count-based approach.
Right.
But that if you had a great idea, you would know where to put it in the story, even though the story is still full of holes.
Yes.
So it's a very forgiving system that allows you to recycle a lot of ideas, and so it becomes quicker, to go through the process, so that you can actually complete films. At the moment, the Scriptonite has a short film, a series for TV, and a feature film series of templates, so that it's really quite efficient in terms of being not just a philosophical tool, but a very efficient and practical one.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to check it out. So
yeah,
I definitely want to. I definitely want to see what it is. But we're running out of time, and it has been so much fun talking to you. I mean, I can really sense your passion in teaching other people, your craft. And everybody, go to his website. If you want Danny to coach you, there's so many options on there for ways to get in touch with him and to help you with your screenplay, whether you're just thinking about it, whether you have one already written, he can help you with that. And
we actually this year I have workshops in California, in Italy, and in Sweden. So there's a lot of options.
And I will put the links below the video for anybody who wants to just click on there and to see your stuff. And it's been so much fun talking to you. Thank you for being on my show.
Okay, thanks a lot for having me.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.